The dust of that long summer had a way of getting inside a man, settling in his lungs and in his soul. For Amos Hale, it had been 10 years of breathing dust. 10 years since the diphtheria came and went, taking his wife Martha and his boy Thomas with it, leaving behind a silence so loud it screamed. The farm was dying. He knew it. The corn was thirsty, the barn timbers groaned, and the fences sagged like tired old men. At 68, Amos felt a kinship with the decay. He was just another part of the farm that was slowly giving up. He moved through his chores like a ghost, feed the chickens, milk the one scrawny cow, patch another hole in a roof that was more hole than roof. Every nail he hammered was a beat in a long, slow funeral march. The town of Redemption Creek was no help. They looked at him with pity, their whispers following him out of the general store. Poor old Amos, they'd say, lost everything. Their pity felt like a shovel, tossing dirt on a grave that was already full. So he kept to himself, alone with the dust and the memories. The only thing on the farm with any fire left in it was Behemoth, the bull, a mountain of muscle and bad temper. Amos kept him out of stubbornness, a living reminder of a time when he'd had dreams of a real herd, of a future. Now, the bull was just a danger, penned in by rotting wood and Amos's fading strength. Behemoth was the rage Amos couldn't feel anymore. He was out by the south pasture, wrestling a fence post that had more rot than wood when he saw him. A flicker of movement at the edge of his property. An old man walking the faint path that cut across the corner of his land. Lakota. His back was straight, his long gray braids bound in leather. He walked with a dignity that Amos had long forgotten. Amos knew the path. It was an old trail, there before the deeds and the survey lines, before Redemption Creek was even a name. Most folks would have run the man off with a shotgun, but Amos just watched. There was no harm in a man walking. He turned back to his work, the thud of the hammer a lonely sound in the blistering heat. And that's when he heard it, a sound like a gunshot, a crack of splintering wood, followed by a roar that shook the dry air. Amos's head snapped up, his blood ran cold. Behemoth. The bull stood where the fence used to be, snorting steam, its small eyes burning with hate, and those eyes were fixed on the one moving thing in the open field. The Lakota elder. Time slowed down. The world became thick, like molasses. Amos saw the bull paw the ground, its muscles bunching. He saw the elder turn, not with fear, but with a kind of weary resignation. There was nowhere to run. The field was a killing floor. Something inside Amos, something that had been dead and buried for 10 years, broke loose. It wasn't a thought. It was a fire. He dropped the hammer. He didn't feel the ache in his back or the protest of his joints. He vaulted the broken fence like a young man, his worn boots pounding the parched earth. He didn't have a plan. He only knew one thing. That old man was not going to die today, not on his land. "Run!" Amos screamed, his voice a raw thing, torn from his throat. "The rocks! Get to the rocks!" The bull charged, a ton of fury, a black locomotive of death. Amos reached the elder just as the beast closed in. He didn't think. He acted. He shoved the old man with all his might, sending him stumbling toward a cluster of granite boulders. Then Amos turned to face the storm. He braced himself, his arms spread wide as if he could hold back an earthquake. The impact was absolute. The bull's massive skull hit him like a cannonball, lifting him off his feet, throwing him through the air. He heard a sickening crack, the sound of his own body breaking. A white-hot universe of pain exploded in his chest. The world was just dust and sky, and a pain so big it had no end. He hit the ground hard, the breath driven from his body. Through a swimming haze of agony, he saw the bull skid to a stop, turning, getting ready to charge again, to finish the job. This is it, he thought, with a strange, calm sadness. A pathetic end for a pathetic man. But the second charge never came. The Lakota elder hadn't run. He'd circled back, his walking stick in his hand. He was moving with a surprising speed, making a low, whistling sound like a bird call. He waved the stick, and the bull, confused by this new, defiant target, bellowed and turned its attention. The elder didn't fight the bull. He danced with it. He used its own rage, its own momentum, leading the beast in a wide circle, away from the broken man on the ground. It was a masterclass in courage and wisdom. Only when the bull was a safe distance away, its fury spent on empty charges, did the elder return. He knelt beside Amos. His dark eyes were calm, but they saw everything. They saw the broken ribs, the fight for every breath. Amos tried to speak, to say something, but all that came out was a wet, rattling sound. The elder placed a hand on his shoulder, a silent promise. He spoke a few words in his own tongue, the language as smooth and worn as river stones. Then he stood and walked toward the creek bed, disappearing into the tall grass. Amos lay there, drifting. The pain was a constant companion. He had failed. He couldn't even die right. He had just gotten himself shattered in front of a stranger. When the elder returned, he carried a handful of leaves and roots. He crushed them between two rocks, making a dark, fragrant paste. He gently applied it to Amos's chest. The cool poultice was a small miracle, a moment of relief in an ocean of fire. The elder looked at him, then at the distant farmhouse. He seemed to make up his mind. He spoke another soft word, then turned and began walking, not toward town, but back the way he had come, east into the hills. He was leaving. Amos was alone again, with nothing but the pain and the vast, empty sky. He closed his eyes and let the darkness take him. He awoke to thunder, not the thunder of a storm, but the rhythmic, synchronized drumming of many horses. He forced his eyes open. The world was a red, blurry smear. Silhouetted against the setting sun were 7 figures on horseback. They were Lakota, their hair long in the breeze, their faces impossible to read. They dismounted as one, a fluid, silent motion. They were an overwhelming presence in the quiet twilight. The old prejudices of Redemption Creek, buried but not dead, clawed their way up Amos's throat. He was broken, helpless, surrounded. Fear, cold and sharp, cut through the fog of pain. The men approached, their moccasins silent on the dry earth. The elder he had saved, Tashunka, was with them. He pointed at Amos. One of the riders, who seemed to be the leader, tall and powerfully built, with eyes like a hawk, knelt beside him. His movements were precise, efficient. He and another man slid their hands under Amos's back and legs. Their touch was gentle, but strong as oak. "We will take you to your house," the man said. His English was perfect, just touched with an accent. Amos tried to protest, to tell them to leave him, that he was fine. But even the thought of moving sent lightning through his ribs. He could only manage a strangled groan. They lifted him as if he weighed nothing. The world spun sickeningly. He was vaguely aware of the other sons fanning out across his property. One picked up his discarded hammer. Another headed for the broken fence, already starting the repair. They carried him into his own house, a place that hadn't seen a visitor in 10 years. They laid him gently on his own bed. As they moved back out into the twilight, Amos Hale knew his quiet, lonely life was over. He just had no idea if he had been rescued, or if he had been captured. The days that followed were a blur of pain and confusion. Tashunka's 7 sons didn't just visit. They moved in. They took over the dilapidated barn, transforming it from a place of rot and decay into a functioning camp. They didn't ask permission. They simply acted, a quiet, disciplined force that now dictated the rhythm of the farm. The eldest son, the one with the hawk eyes, was named Chayton. He became Amos's reluctant keeper. Every morning, he would appear in the bedroom doorway, holding a bowl of thin broth and a cup of bitter tea that smelled of the earth. Their interactions were silent, watchful. Amos, a prisoner in his own bed, did nothing but watch them back. His mind was a storm of suspicion. Why were they really here? What did they want from him? Every small kindness felt like a down payment on a debt he could never hope to pay. He watched Chayton move through the quiet rooms of his house. He noticed the man would walk around Martha's old rocking chair, never touching it. He saw the careful way he handled the worn tin plates, the same way Martha used to. There was no threat in him, just a deep, unnerving seriousness. "You must rest," Chayton would say, his voice a low rumble. "3 ribs are broken. The healing will be slow." "Why?" Amos finally rasped one afternoon, the single word costing him a jolt of pain. "Why are you here?" Chayton was changing the poultice on Amos's chest. He paused, his gaze direct, unflinching. "My father, Tashunka, was in danger. You stood between him and the bull. You took the blow meant for him. This is a debt of life. Our honor demands it be repaid." "It was nothing," Amos grumbled, trying to shift and immediately regretting it. "Stupid old man and a stupid bull. You can go. I'm fine." "You are not fine," Chayton said. It wasn't an argument. It was a statement of fact. "You cannot work. Your animals will starve. Your fields will turn to dust. We will not allow the man who saved our father to perish because of his good deed. We will work your land. We will mend your home. We will stay until the debt is paid." And they stayed. From his bedroom window, Amos watched the resurrection of his farm. The sons worked with a silent, seamless coordination that was both beautiful and agonizing to see. It was the way he and his own son, Thomas, used to work, a silent language of shared purpose passing between them. He watched them rebuild the bull's pasture, not with patches, but with new, solid posts and thick rails, their axes rising and falling in perfect rhythmic harmony. He saw 2 of them on the barn roof, methodically replacing the shingles that had been leaking for a decade. Another son, Kangi, who had a whisperer's way with animals, tended to his meager livestock. The milk cow started to look healthier, her coat gaining a shine. The chickens were safe in a newly fortified coop. They didn't waste a single motion. Their actions were their language, and they spoke of honor, of skill, of a purpose that Amos couldn't quite understand. It seemed like too much for just a simple life debt. Their work was too precise, too thorough. Tashunka, the father, visited every day. The old man would sit in a chair by the bed. They shared no language, but they communicated all the same. Tashunka would examine Amos's ribs with practiced, gentle hands, nodding at the slow progress. Then they would just sit, sharing a silence that wasn't empty like the one Amos was used to. It was a silence of respect. In those quiet hours, Amos felt the first cracks appear in the hard shell he had built around his heart. But he also watched them when they thought he wasn't. From his window, he saw them walking the property lines, not like farmers, but like surveyors. He saw them pacing out distances, studying the land, their heads close together in quiet conversation. One afternoon, he saw 2 of the younger sons near the old, dry well at the far end of the property. They weren't fixing it. They were digging, carefully moving stones, studying the ground itself. They were looking for something. The suspicion returned, cold and heavy. This wasn't about a debt. This was about something else entirely. He was a pawn in a game he didn't understand. One evening, a sound drifted into his room that almost stopped his heart. A faint, tinkling melody. A simple, sweet lullaby he hadn't heard in 10 years. He pushed himself up, ignoring the fire in his side. In the main room, bathed in the soft lamplight, sat one of the younger sons, Wapasha. He had clever, nimble hands. And in front of him was Martha's old music box. The hinge had been broken for years, its music silenced. Wapasha had taken it apart. With a small knife and impossible patience, he had whittled a new gear from a tiny piece of hardwood. He turned the key, and the fragile, perfect melody filled the hollow house. The sound broke him. A deep, shuddering sob tore its way out of him, a raw, painful sound from the bottom of his grief. He hadn't cried like this since the day he buried his family. He hadn't allowed himself to. Chayton was in the doorway in an instant, his face alarmed. He saw Amos shaking, tears cutting clean tracks through the dust on his weathered cheeks. Chayton's hard expression softened with a flicker of understanding. He barked something sharp in Lakota at his younger brother. Wapasha looked up, startled, his face falling as he realized what he had done. He quickly reached out and closed the lid, silencing the music. "No," Amos choked out, the word barely a whisper. "Let it play." Chayton hesitated, then gave his brother a slow nod. The music began again, a ghost in the dim light. Chayton walked to the bed and sat on the edge, a silent, solid presence in the storm of Amos's grief. "It was my wife's," Amos said, his voice thick. "Martha. And my boy Thomas. He loved that song." He didn't know why he was telling him this. The words just came, spilling out, a decade of silence and sorrow. He spoke of Martha's smile, of Thomas's laugh, of the crushing, endless quiet they left behind. Chayton listened, his gaze never leaving Amos's face. He listened until the story was told, until Amos was empty and spent. "We also know loss," Chayton said, his voice low and steady. "The spotted sickness took my sister. To live is to lose, but to live is also to remember. The song does not bring back the dead, Amos Hale. It brings back the love they gave you. That is a strength, not a weakness." In that moment, something shifted. Amos no longer saw a captor. He saw a man who understood the shape of grief. He saw a man who knew that some debts have nothing to do with bulls or broken bones. The fear in his heart didn't vanish, but something else took root beside it. A fragile, tentative trust. As the music played on, Amos looked past Chayton, at Wapasha, who was now carefully wiping the music box clean. He hadn't just found it on the mantelpiece. Amos kept it in the bottom of Martha's old sewing basket, buried under patterns and scraps of cloth. Wapasha hadn't stumbled upon it. He had been looking for it. The melody wasn't just a song, it was a message. And the look in Chayton's eyes told Amos that they had both just heard it. The trust withered. The fear came back, colder than before. They weren't just searching his land. They were searching his life. The world outside the farm couldn't stay ignorant for long. News in a place like Redemption Creek traveled on whispers and suspicion, and the sight of 7 Lakota men working the old Hale farm was the biggest news in years. It started in the general store, grew louder in the saloon, and finally hardened into a demand for action. Sheriff Callahan liked a quiet life. He wasn't a bad man, but he was a man who bent to the will of the town's loudest voices. And the loudest voice belonged to Mr. Weston, the banker. Weston had been trying to buy Amos's land for years. He always said it was out of charity, to help the old man unburden himself. Amos had always refused. Now, Weston was spreading stories that Amos was being held captive, that the Lakota were squatting, that it was the start of an uprising. One morning, a cloud of dust on the horizon announced their arrival. Sheriff Callahan, with a grim-faced posse of 4 men, and Mr. Weston, his face a mask of righteous concern. They reined in their horses at the edge of the yard. Chayton and his brothers stopped their work, gathering in a silent, solid line by the barn. They were unarmed, but their stillness was more intimidating than any weapon. "That's far enough," Chayton called out, his voice sharp and clear. "This is private property." "It's Amos Hale's property," Callahan retorted, swinging down from his horse. "And we're here to check on his welfare. We've had reports." "He is not being held," Chayton said, his voice dropping to a dangerous low. He is being cared for. Weston scoffed. Cared for? Looks to me like you've taken over. We know your kind. You see a weak old man and you take what you can get. The air crackled. The brothers tensed. Chayton held up a hand, a small, controlling gesture. Then the farmhouse door opened. Amos stood there, leaning on a walking stick Waukesha had carved for him. He was pale, but his eyes were burning. With a monumental effort, he had pulled himself from bed. Chayton was at his side in an instant, a steadying hand on his back. Amos, thank God, the sheriff said, taking a step forward. Are you all right? Don't worry, we'll get these squatters off your land. You'll do no such thing, Amos said. His voice was stronger than he expected, fueled by a cold anger. These men are here at my invitation. Weston laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. Your invitation? Amos, be sensible. They've taken advantage of you. The only thing I'm a hostage to is my own broken body. Amos snapped back. He took a painful step forward, shaking off Chayton's hand. And I broke it saving that man there, he said, nodding toward Tashunka, who had emerged from the barn. From my own bull. He told them the story, in short, ragged breaths. He told them how these men had tended his wounds and started to bring his farm back from the dead. They've shown me more honor in 2 weeks than I've seen from this town in 10 years, Amos declared, his gaze landing on Weston. They're repaying a debt, a concept you might not understand. Weston's face tightened. This is nonsense. Sheriff, I am the legal executor of the original deedholder's estate. This land has certain covenants. I demand to inspect the property. Chayton stepped forward. You demand nothing. There are survey markers, Weston pressed, his eyes darting past the house, toward the old dry well. From the original railroad grant. I have a right to ensure they haven't been disturbed. It was a lie, and they all knew it. But it was a lie wrapped in the law. This is still my land, Amos said, his strength fading. He leaned back against the doorframe. And I'm telling you, Sheriff, to take your banker and get off it. These men are my guests. Callahan looked from Amos's pain-filled face to Chayton's unyielding stare. He saw a complicated mess, not a simple crime. He was a man of the law, and for now, the law was on the side of the property owner. All right, Amos, he said with a weary sigh. Mount up, boys. Nothing for us to do here. Weston sputtered, his face red with fury. Sheriff, you can't just leave him? He's a free man on his own property, Callahan said, his tone final. He's made his choice. As they rode away, Weston twisted in his saddle to look back. His eyes weren't on Amos. They were fixed on that patch of ground by the dry well, and his expression was not one of concern. It was one of frustrated greed. Amos sagged against the door, the fight draining out of him. Chayton was there, guiding him back inside. As he helped Amos back to the bed, he leaned in close. That man, he said, his voice a low whisper. He is not worried about you, Amos Hale. He knows. He is looking for the same thing we are. The words landed like stones. The debt, the honor, it was all a lie. A cover story. They were all just using him, his farm a treasure map, and he was the bewildered old man living on top of the X. He had driven away his neighbors, the only people he'd known for decades, for a group of strangers who were just as greedy as the banker. He had traded one kind of isolation for another. He had never felt more alone. That night, sleep wouldn't come. Chayton's words echoed in the darkness. He is looking for the same thing we are. What was it? What could be buried on this worthless patch of dirt that would bring a Lakota family and a town banker into a silent war? Amos's mind drifted back to the music box. They hadn't just fixed it. They had searched for it. He thought of the melody, a tune so deeply woven into his memory of Martha. He pushed himself to the edge of the bed, his ribs screaming in protest. Every movement was a fresh agony, but the mystery was a greater pain. He used the carved walking stick to steady himself and shuffled into the main room. The house was silent. The sons were asleep in the barn. He was alone. The music box sat on the kitchen table, a small, dark square in the moonlight. He picked it up. The wood was smooth beneath his calloused fingers. He ran his thumb along the bottom. It felt solid, but Chaitin's words had planted a seed of doubt. He thought back, trying to remember where it came from. It had been a gift from his father, given to Martha on their wedding day. His father. A man Amos barely remembered. A quiet, haunted man who had bought this farm after the war and worked himself into an early grave. A man who never spoke of his past. Amos pressed on the bottom of the box. Nothing. He ran his fingers along the seams. Near one of the corners, he felt it. A tiny imperfection. A slight give in the wood. He pressed harder. A click, soft as a sigh. A section of the bottom panel popped open, revealing a hidden compartment. His heart hammered against his broken ribs. His hands trembled as he reached inside. He wasn't sure what he expected. Gold coins? A deed? It was a leather pouch, old and worn soft with time. It was tied shut with a leather thong. He fumbled with the knot, his fingers clumsy. Inside were two objects. The first was a piece of bone, carved into the shape of a soaring hawk. It was intricate, beautiful, and felt warm in his hand, alive with a history he couldn't comprehend. The second was a letter, the paper yellowed and folded into a tiny square. He carefully unfolded it. The ink was faded, the handwriting his father's. He held it up to the moonlight filtering through the window, and he read, "My dearest Amos, if you are reading this, then I am gone, and the time for secrets is over. I was not a good father to you. I was a ghost, haunted by what I did and what I saw. I was a soldier at a place called Wounded Knee. I followed orders. I did things for which God will never forgive me. But I did one thing right. In the chaos, I saw a warrior, a great man named Tashunka, fall. Before he died, he pushed this pouch into my hands. He made me swear to keep it safe. It is the spirit hawk of his people, their most sacred treasure. To lose it is to lose their soul. I deserted that very night. I ran. I bought this farm, this isolated place, to hide it, to keep my promise. I built this house on top of the old well to seal the place where their other relics were hidden by their ancestors. The path they walk across our land is not a shortcut. It is a pilgrimage. They are looking. One day, they will come. A man of honor, a descendant of the first Tashunka, will come for what was stolen. Do not give it to a man of greed. You will know the difference. This is my only legacy, my only chance at redemption. Your loving father, Elias Hale." The letter fell from his fingers. His entire life was a lie. His father wasn't just a quiet farmer. He was a deserter, a guardian. This farm wasn't a random plot of land. It was a sanctuary, a hiding place. Tashunka, the elder. He had the same name as the warrior in the letter. He wasn't just passing by. He had been led here. He had come to reclaim his people's soul. And Weston? Mr. Weston, the banker. The letter mentioned a man of greed. Weston's father had been a quartermaster with the army at that time, a man known for looting from the dead. He didn't want the land for a railroad spur. He was after the relics his father had failed to find. The pieces clicked into place, a terrible, beautiful mosaic of truth. The sons weren't searching the farm for gold. They were searching for their history, their identity, and the music box. The melody must have been a signal, a prearranged sign known only to his father and the Lakota. He wasn't a prisoner. He was the key. A sudden commotion from outside shattered the silence. A panicked shout, followed by the sound of running feet. The farmhouse door burst open. It was Kangi, the son who cared for the animals. His face was pale in the moonlight. Chayton! He yelled, his voice tight with panic. It's the bull! Behemoth is down! He's not moving! I think he's been poisoned. Amos looked from the panic on Kangi's face to the spirit hawk in his hand. He understood. The bull wasn't just an animal. The old well was in his pasture. Behemoth, with his terrible rage, had been the unwitting guardian of the sacred ground, and Weston had just removed him from the board. They weren't waiting for the law anymore. They were coming. They were coming tonight. The news of the poisoned bull landed like a death sentence. It wasn't just an act of cruelty, it was a tactical move, a declaration of war. Weston was done with niceties. He's testing us, Chayton said, his voice a low growl. He stood in the center of the room, his 6 brothers gathered around him. They were no longer farmers. In the flickering lamplight, their faces were hard, their eyes ancient. They were warriors. He wanted to see how we would react, to draw us out. He will come soon, under the cover of darkness. Amos, holding the letter and the spirit hawk, finally spoke. This is my fight too. He told them everything. He read his father's letter aloud, his voice steady for the first time in years. As he spoke, the last of his suspicion melted away, replaced by a fierce, protective loyalty. The story bound them together, a secret history shared between 2 families scarred by the same tragedy. When he finished, Tashunka, who had entered silently, stepped forward. He looked at the spirit hawk in Amos's hand, and for the first time, the old man's stoic face showed a profound emotion, a deep, soul-shaking relief. He placed a hand over his heart and then extended it to Amos, a gesture of ultimate gratitude and respect. My father's father, Chayton translated, his voice thick with emotion, told stories of the spirit hawk. He said it would be returned by a man with a broken heart but a strong spirit. He said we would find our home where we found the hawk. There was no more time for stories. The night was growing darker. He will come with hired guns, Amos said, a long dormant part of his mind awakening. He had been a boy in the army, just for a short time before his father pulled him out, but he remembered the training. He'll think he's attacking a bunch of farmers. We can use that. A new energy surged through him. He was no longer a broken old man waiting to die. He was the guardian of this land, of this secret. He was Elias Hale's son. The house is solid, Amos said, pointing. The windows are small. The doors are thick oak. We fortify it. Wapasha, Kangi, barricade the windows with the tables and cupboards. Leave only small firing slits. We don't have many guns. We do not need them, another brother Hota said. He held up a powerful bow. We have these. Good, Amos nodded. The rest of you with me. We're not going to wait for them to get here. We're going to make them regret every step they take on this land. They moved with a silent, deadly purpose. Chayton and his brothers faded into the darkness of the farm, their knowledge of the terrain now a weapon. They used old farming equipment to create obstacles, dug shallow pits in the paths, and used rope to set simple but effective traps in the cornfields. They were ghosts, preparing a battlefield. Amos directed the defense of the house. He felt an old, familiar clarity. He knew the creak of every floorboard, the blind spots from every window. This house, which for 10 years had been his tomb, was now his fortress. He stood by the main window, peering into the inky blackness. Tashunka was beside him, a silent, calming presence. The old man held the spirit hawk, his knuckles white. They didn't have to wait long. First, it was a flicker of light in the distance, then another, and another. Lanterns, moving through the cornfields, a small army of them. At least a dozen men, spreading out, surrounding the house. Weston wasn't taking any chances. The first shot came without warning. A rifle cracked, and a bullet splintered the wood frame of the window next to Amos's head. The siege had begun. The night exploded into chaos, but it was a controlled chaos. Weston's men charged forward, expecting to overwhelm a sleeping farmhouse. Instead, they ran into a nightmare. Cries of pain and surprise erupted from the darkness as men fell into the shallow pits or were ensnared by ropes. From the shadows of the cornrows, arrows flew with silent, deadly accuracy, finding their marks and sowing panic. Hotah and his brothers were wraiths, striking and melting back into the night. The hired guns, accustomed to straightforward fights, fell into disarray. They fired wildly into the darkness, their bullets chewing up the walls of the barn and the empty fields. From inside the house, Amos directed the defense. He knew Weston's goal wouldn't be to win a firefight. It would be to get inside, to get to the secret hidden beneath the floorboards. "He's coming for the back door," Amos said, his voice calm. "It's the weakest point." As if summoned by his words, 3 men broke from the chaotic firefight and made a dash for the rear of the house. One carried a heavy battering ram, but Chayton was waiting for them. He emerged from the shadow of the smokehouse, a silent, avenging spirit. The fight was brutal and quick. He moved with a speed and power that was breathtaking, disarming and disabling the men before they could even raise their weapons. He was protecting his home. The main assault faltered. The initial confidence of Weston's men was shattered, replaced by fear of an enemy they couldn't see. But Weston was smart. The chaos was exactly what he needed. While his men were pinned down, he used the distraction to slip around the side of the house, staying low, using the deep shadows as cover. He carried a shotgun and a satchel, his face a grim mask of determination. He wasn't after a battle. He was a thief in the night. He reached the front porch, the one place no one was watching. With a powerful kick, he splintered the front door, bursting into the main room. Amos was there, waiting for him. He stood alone in the center of the room, holding not a gun, but his father's old, heavy hammer. Tushunka was behind him, clutching the spirit hawk. "It's over, old man," Weston snarled, leveling the shotgun. "Give it to me. I know you have it. My father knew it was here somewhere. He searched for years." "Your father was a thief and a ghoul," Amos said, his voice steady, "and you are his son." "I'm a pragmatist," Weston spat. "That junk belongs in a museum, or better yet, in a private collection where it will fetch a fortune. You're sitting on a gold mine." He took a step forward, but a shadow detached itself from the doorway to the bedroom. It was Chayton. He had circled back, anticipating Weston's move. Weston's eyes widened. He swung the shotgun toward Chayton, but he was too slow. Chayton lunged, grabbing the barrel, forcing it upward. The gun went off with a deafening roar, blowing a hole in the ceiling. The 2 men grappled, a desperate struggle of strength and will. They crashed against the furniture, their fight a whirlwind of destruction. Weston was strong, but Chayton was driven by a sacred purpose. He slammed the banker against the wall, and the shotgun clattered to the floor. Weston, desperate, pulled a knife. He slashed wildly, catching Chayton on the arm. As Chayton staggered back, Weston saw his chance. He ignored the warrior and dove for the real prize, the old man and the pouch. He lunged at Tushunka, but Amos was there. He moved with a speed that defied his age and his injuries. He raised the heavy hammer, the same hammer he had used to try and mend his broken fences, to hold his dying farm together. He brought it down with all the force of a lifetime of grief and anger. It didn't strike Weston's head. Amos wasn't a killer. It struck his wrist, the one holding the knife. The crack of breaking bone was sickeningly loud in the small room. Weston screamed, a high, thin sound of agony, and collapsed, clutching his shattered hand. The fight was over. The sounds of shouting outside announced the arrival of new players. Sheriff Callahan and a larger official posse had arrived, drawn by the sounds of a full-blown gun battle. They burst into the room to find Weston on the floor, his hired guns surrendering in the yard, and Amos Hale standing over the banker, hammer in hand, flanked by a silent Lakota warrior and his father. Callahan took in the scene, the hole in the ceiling, the knife on the floor, the look of pure, greedy hate on Weston's face. He finally understood. "Amos," the sheriff said, his voice full of a new respect. "Are you all right?" "I am," Amos said, letting the hammer fall to his side. He looked at Chayton, who was clutching his bleeding arm, at Tashunka, who was holding the Spirit Hawk safe, and at the home that had been defended and saved. "We all are." Justice, like the dawn, had finally come to the farm. In the aftermath, the truth came out. Weston, facing a long prison sentence, confessed everything. The story of the Spirit Hawk, of the secret promise kept for decades by the Hale family, became a local legend. The town of Redemption Creek, faced with the undeniable truth of Weston's greed and Amos's quiet heroism, began to change. The fear and suspicion they had held for the strangers on the Hale farm slowly turned into curiosity, and then into a grudging respect. Amos, in a move that shocked the county clerk, officially deeded half of his land to Tashunka and his family. It wasn't a gift. It was a recognition of a shared truth. This land was their home, too. It always had been. The farm, once a place of silence and decay, was now teeming with life. The 7 sons of Tashunka became well-known figures, their skills as farmers and horsemen sought after. They brought a new prosperity not just to the farm, but to the whole area. The 2 families merged into one. Amos taught the younger sons about crop rotation and mending engines. They, in turn, taught him their language, their stories, their history. The silence in Amos's heart was filled with the sounds of laughter, of conversation, of belonging. He was no longer a lonely old man. He was a father again, a grandfather, an elder. One crisp autumn evening, a year later, the entire family sat on the newly repaired porch, watching the sun set over a bountiful harvest. It was the best harvest the farm had seen in a generation. Wapasha had taken to winding the old music box every evening. Its faint, sweet melody drifted out into the cool air. The tune, which had once been a song of unbearable loss for Amos, was now a hymn of redemption, a song of a promise kept. Amos Hale leaned back in his chair, the dull ache in his ribs a gentle reminder of the day his life had truly begun. He was surrounded by his sons, his family. He was home. The story of Amos and the Spirit Hawk serves as a powerful reminder that honor, courage, and family are not defined by blood or by borders, but by the promises we keep. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe for more tales of the unexpected.